Well, Raider Nation, here we are again. The Raiders fall to the Pittsburgh Steelers 13-10 in what is, I think, fair to say, a microcosm of the 2022 NFL season for the Las Vegas Raiders. Eddie Paskal with my man Jason Fitz in the fifth quarter, presented by Twitch. Look at that rhyming on a holiday. And Fitz, first of all, so fantastic to spend a little bit of this holiday with you. You look well. I wish you and yours nothing but happiness. And unfortunately, the silver and black did not deliver that to us today. So, like I said at the top, man, it just really feels like 2022 in a nutshell these past 3 hours, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, and by the way, I love the fact that for anyone that's watching us and not listening to us, you're wearing a festive Raiders sweater. I'm wearing a holiday hoobie woody. I decided to go Grinch because the Grinch just stole more of my joy on this Christmas Eve edition, right? But this game was just like so much of the season in the sense that there were times that this Raiders team looked really good. And there were times that you thought, you know what, they've got it figured out. And there were times that weaknesses looked like strength. And then as the game wore on, it just felt like all of that mirage, that house of cards, just sort of crumbled late in the game. And I think I echo the sentiment of most fans that were watching when Pittsburgh got the ball back with a few minutes left. You just kind of knew where this thing was going. You can only ask that defense to do so much. And defense played really well, but unfortunately couldn't get the stop when they needed it most.
And I agree with you 100%. And it's just, you think of that final drive, and it felt very Ramsey, didn't it? It felt very like I've seen this movie before. And unfortunately for Raiders fans, they have seen this movie before. And you brought up a great point, though, that I want to kind of hit on there for a second, Fitz. You can only ask this defense to do so much, right? You and I have talked about it a lot this year. We talked about it last year. This defense is not the 85 Bears, right? This defense, keeping in mind that you're down at the end of the game, you're down Chandler Jones out with injury and Denzel Perryman out with injury. Fitz literally going into the darkness right now, which is so good. Which is so good.
I'm going to be the bougiest person ever. I hope all of this makes the episode. Hey, Google, turn on the lights. Look at that. See, I'll tell you this. See,
you got to laugh, man. You got to laugh.
The reason I'm downstairs, by the way, echoing this, I'm in Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
My office, where I usually do this show from, is a room that does not have heat in it, right? It's above the garage, and it's like negative 5, 6 in there. So I was like, I'll take everything down, and I'll do it in the dining room. So I closed the curtain, set it up, and then the dining room lights apparently went off. So there we go. It's just that's a microcosm of my season.
Oh, it's so good. But like I said, I mean, you're down your defense that, to be fair, I think played pretty well for the most part of this game. But you're down Chandler Jones, you're down Denzel Perryman. You can only ask so much of them, right? I think that there was a collective feeling that the levees were going to break at some point. And that final drive, you're like, do they have one more in them? They've given everything they got. Max Crosby is running on fumes out there. That guy looks exhausted. Do they have one more in them? And unfortunately, they didn't. But I think the kind of bigger point to that is the defense shouldn't have been in that position, right, Fitz?
100%. And look, there's going to be some real fair questions when we break down the film on that last drive, because it did feel very Ramsey. And again, it felt like they were leaving the middle of the field wide open in a super safe playback zone. And I don't necessarily understand that because this defense doesn't do that particularly well quite often. I thought, in a game where Max wasn't able to have the impact that we sometimes see him have, but Clee Furl had a beautiful game. I mean, Clee was all over the place. But to your point, you reach that fourth quarter drive, you need somebody other than Max to be able to make a play. And there just wasn't anybody there. I mean, at the end of the day, they had time to throw the football. They had time to find the open guys. In the middle of the field was being left wide open by that defense, not just on the last play, but for the last 3 or 4 plays. So it just sort of all felt like it imploded. I'm not going to put that squarely on the defense, though, because, again, you held them to 13 points. Like, when you hold the other team to 13 points and you have this offense, which, by the way, is now healthy, you should win these football games.
Yeah, and I mean, and here's the deal, too. And Jesse Merrick, our mutual friend, just tweeted this out, and I think this kind of really is a perfect encapsulation for what the Raiders offense did or, candidly, did not do tonight. Raiders offensive drives, per Jesse Merrick, after the field goal that made it 10-3 Raiders. 1 play, 0 yards, interception. 5 plays, 15 yards, interception. 6 plays, -3 yards, punt. 5 plays, 13 yards, punt. 3 plays, 5 yards, punt. 2 plays, 0 yards, interception. That's a wrap. The Raiders gained in the second half, Jason Fitz, 30 yards on offense.
Which would be an abomination if that's the first time we've seen explosion in the second half, but it's not. So, like, now you got to ask yourself, what's going wrong? Like, why are all the things that feel like they're working early on? Because this is the chess match of football, right? So the Raiders come out with the game plan. The Steelers adjust to that game plan. Why is there no then counter adjustment to the adjustment? Like, it just feels like in the second half, more often than not, this is something I harped on a couple of weeks ago when the Raiders imploded on the second half, and I kept saying they ran 20 plays in the second half. You cannot win football games if you are putting your defense on the field too much and if you can't drives. And this team in the second half, Kansas, like I'm not even faulting the interceptions, which, when it's that cold out, it was an easy bet to say, hey, there were going to be some interceptions. But I am looking at it saying everything's out of sync. Passing was just, the number of times that it was a weird throw to Devontae, like it was not Derek Carr's finest hour. So when you look across the board and the offense is healthy and you have Derek Carr, I expected more. I expected more from the offense in this particular game.
And look, I think that this is where I kind of stand on things. And I've always been really honest with you about, I don't want to say my shortcomings, but the things that I'm not particularly good at, right? I've never claimed to be an X's and O's guru, right? I have never claimed to be someone who is breaking down tape for hours on end. But one thing that I do kind of pride myself on is I like to live in a world of like reason and rationale, right? If A plus B equals C, then, the opposite is also true. You're going into a game in Pittsburgh, right? You're traveling east on a short week. The weather was the weather, right? The weather affected the Raiders. It also affected the Steelers. But I'm thinking in the week leading up to this game, if you're going to have these adverse conditions that Mother Nature is going to send your way for the holiday, it almost felt like the Raiders were built to withstand those because when they're at their best, they are a run-first team. And you know what travels really well when it's windy and snowy and cold is a run game. And you look at that opening drive against the Steelers today, Raiders go 14 plays, 72 yards, eat up almost 8.5 minutes of clock, and you say, yes, this is it. This is the formula. Let's run this back for the next 3.5 quarters. And I think for me, it's confusing, Fitz, where you look and Josh Jacobs' numbers at the end of the day, 15 carries, 44 yards. There was Brandon Bolden was the only other running back that got a touch, and he had 1 carry for 0 yards. Your second leading rusher today was Derek Carr. So I guess for me, like, I'm just confused, right? And I'm not in the business of questioning anyone or, this is what we should do or what we shouldn't do. I guess just Eddie wanting to know is curious. Okay, it worked so well in the opening series, but then you get away from that. Like, that to me is the hard part of trying to compute this this loss.
I think there are moments later in the first half where what you saw Pittsburgh doing is doing a bunch of run blitz fits, right? Like they were bringing because the Raiders were not effectively anybody watching the first drive. Even the commentators on the NFL Network were like, oh, it looks like the ball's coming out high. It looks like the ball's coming out late. They're having a hard time throwing the football. If Pittsburgh sees that, they say, okay, don't worry about it. We're not going to worry about defending the pass right now. Let's just send everything we have at shutting Josh Jacobs down. But the crazy part to me is that they only had to do that a few times because for whatever reason, once there's a couple of negative runs on the books, we get away from it. What's crazy to me is that we don't get away from negative passes. Like when we have those drives that are 3 and out, but we threw the ball 3 times or interceptions, we continue to throw the football because it's a strength to the personnel. Well, my thing is that if you have 3 or 4 drives that you only get 4 or 5 plays, but it's because you were continuing to hammer the football down their throats, I think that pays dividends late in the fourth quarter. That's something how many times a month ago did we see Josh Jacobs running for huge yardage in the late third, fourth quarter because you worn him down? We get away from that. And that takes a discipline in play calling. It takes a disciplined approach. It takes understanding that, you have a certain set of goals you're trying to accomplish. And it feels like we came out in the second half and all of a sudden lost all of our rhythm. And once we lose that momentum and rhythm, I don't know that this Raiders offense knows how to get it back.
And to be fair, right, we talk about Josh in the second half and how effective he's been when this team has been good. Josh did have a few really nice runs in the second half, the best of which was called back for a penalty, right? I mean, Foster Moreau, how often, Fitz, or how seldom do you see a face mask on a running play, right?
Yeah,
never
see
a good
call.
It was a good call. And listen, Foster, Foster got his money worth on that one, right? I mean, he had full hand in the mask. But I mean, you look, and I guess if I don't even want to say a positive, but last week the Raiders have 13 penalties. This week you're down to 2. But both of those penalties so costly. We talk about the timing of these penalties, right? The Foster the Foster, the face mask, the false start. Like, it was just both of them completely threw the Raiders off of schedule. And unfortunately tonight, they just couldn't bounce back and put some points on the board, or enough points on the board.
But think about what the echoed sentiment is every week. Like, I keep saying this about the Raiders this year. It would be so easy if you and I could come together and say, you know what? Here's the one thing to fix,
yes.
Right? This year, like, look at today's game. We saw Foster Moreau have a couple of drops that I think he'd want back, a penalty that he wanted back. It was not his finest game, right? So you look at it and say there were moments. You had Hunter, the ball was a little behind Hunter Renfrow, but usually a ball he catches that turned into a pick. There were just a couple of passes that looked like they went errant. There was one moment where Devontae, I thought he came down with it on the sideline, almost had it, didn't quite have it. Like, we saw so many little close moments to being either big plays, or we saw mistakes from different people. I don't know how you fix that easily. Like, it's not like you can look at this team and say, I figured it out. The one way to fix it is to fix this position and fix that player. It's not that simple.
And I mean, I know we talked about it at the top. I mean, that's the 2022 Raiders in a nutshell, though, right? That is, this area of the game is great one week, is not so great the following week. You're an inch away here. You're one play away for there. You're one ill-timed penalty here from being a completely different season. And it just, to your point, it is maddening. It's confusing. It's just kind of unexplainable how these odd, bizarre things just stack up on each other. And the end result, unfortunately, now is 9 losses for the 2022 Raiders. And like, I'm with you, though. Like, I don't know. Like, if we had the magic wand, right? Here, let's play the game, Fitz. Fitz, I'll give you a magic wand. You get one wish to fix the 2022 Raiders. Where are you going?
I don't know. We're living in a year where Devontae's having an incredible season, right? Like, Josh Jacobs came into this game the leading rusher in the NFL. Max Crosby's having a season that's even better than his contract. I mean, the stars have played like stars. It just hasn't helped. Like, that's the weirdest part of all of it. Like, some years, if I'd have told you back in August, hey, Eddie, Christmas Eve, we're going to hang out after a game. That game is going to have a wind chill of about -10 degrees in Pittsburgh. There's going to be snowy flurries. Jacobs never really gets rolling. The offense struggles. The Raiders lose 13-10. If I say that to you in August, in those conditions with those qualifiers, you're probably like, okay,
checks out.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's Pittsburgh. It's in Pittsburgh. Add the Franco stuff to it. Makes sense. The problem is it's not just that one. There's a but for of these 9 losses now. There's how the hell did that happen? About 6 of them? So, like, how do you make heads or tails of that? Like, that's going to be the weirdest thing, because if this team ends up, now they have an incredibly difficult game against, I think, two of the 3 best teams in the NFL in the next 2 weeks, right? So you got the 49ers and the Chiefs. If this team finishes, 6-10 or 6-11 this year, I guess that would be at this point. If they finish 6-11, like, I don't remember seeing a 6-11 team that you could easily sit down and say, hey, well, look at the way these games are. Like, it's just a confusing season to try and figure out how to analyze, because I really don't know right now if the Raiders are good at a lot of things. I don't know if they're bad at a lot of things. I don't know if we're just unlucky at a lot of things. I can't figure it out.
That's I mean, incredibly well said, because like, maybe we'll just do offense defense, because the special teams, I think they've been, I mean, I know AJ had that one kind of clunker punt today, but there's been moments this year where this Raiders offense has been incredibly dynamic, where you felt, if you're a fan, if you're a member of the Raider Nation, you feel really good about your offense. And then there's been moments where you don't feel good and you're confused and you have questions. On the defensive side of the football, there's been moments, I would say today, by and large, I felt really good about the Raiders defense today. I felt really good about them. There have also been moments in the year where you do not feel really good about them. And as bizarre as it sounds, Fitz, it feels like those two things don't line up. So, like, when the offense is on, the defense isn't having a good day. The defense is balling out like they were today. The offense can't find its rhythm. So it really does just kind of create this muddled confusion of who are the 2022 Las Vegas Raiders. And I don't know if we're going to get a good, firm answer in the next 2 weeks.
Even drive to drive. Hayward, by the way, was an absolute beast today.
Oh.
Hayward was a beast today. We have seen,
and real quick, Dylan Parham's going to be okay. That's a rookie who was just taking his lumps today.
Yeah, 100%. And we started today, and we saw the starting lineup for the offensive line, how many of us sort of nodded our head and thought, all right, we got the guys in, we're going to be just fine, And I agree with you. I think Parham's going to be a star at that position for a very long time. Today was not that day. So one drive, you'll have a totally neutralized Hayward that's not making those plays, and all of a sudden it feels like the Raiders are doing things incredibly well. Couple of different times that they were running, and the jump cut runs that everybody keeps talking about, felt like they were doing a great job of pushing Hayward out of the way, and before you know it creates a lane for Josh to go down. A beautiful thing of beauty. But then the next drive, it's like the minute the ball is snapped, all of a sudden they're just collapsed on. And one of the things that I think is a real trick for this offense, and the solution to this, but the number of times that they're snapping the ball with 1 second left, which I have to tell everybody, like, if you are a defensive lineman and you see it coming down to the wire, you can better anticipate that snap because you know there's one going to nil, you know when to get off the snap. Like if you the ball sometimes with 4 seconds left and sometimes with 7 seconds left. If you vary the snap count, or the snap timing, it keeps the defensive line at bay. When the Raiders aren't doing that, what do you see? If you are so busy moving people all over the place that then you snap the ball as the clock hits zeros, the D-line just keyed off on that and they blow the run up in the back. It's happening every time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, you talk about kind of that drive to drive, almost play by play, kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation for the Raiders. I mean, you see these moments from Renfrow, right? That Renfrow touchdown, you're not going to find a prettier touchdown in 22, especially from Renfrow. And I can't believe, as crazy as it sounds, that was his first touchdown of the year. But I mean, that was the best version of Hunter Renfrow, right? That is third and Renfrow cooking. He had a few third down receptions today. But then you see, 2 series later, whatever it is, Raiders can't get any type of rhythm. And as I said, I'm certainly not, an X's and O's mastermind, but you just wonder, like, why is that? Like, philosophically, I would understand maybe game to game or even half to half, but the fact that we're so granular that drive to drive, it can look so drastically different is got to be the most frustrating thing for fans.
There's got to be more opportunity, and this is I've used this comparison with you before, but when you watch Miami's offense, like when everybody goes and watches the Miami Packers game, watch how much pre-snap movement and motion happens, because and all of it has a purpose. Like this isn't the NFL of 20 years ago where you just put somebody in motion for the heck of it. Like it gives keys, it gives tells to the quarterback. It all has purpose. It also tests eye discipline, as they say all the time. When you watch how much motion early in the games there is before everything, but then you watch later in games, it's like as the game moves on, the offense feels more like it's just walk up to the line of scrimmage and let's just get this playoff. Let's just get this playoff. It's far less intentional pre-snap than it is early in the game. I don't know why that's the approach, but it's part of what self-scouting wise has to be fixed. I mean, that's part of the numbers they keep talking about, that the scouting will show in certain formations the Raiders run every time. Well, you've got to figure that stuff out. Scouting, that's one area I think the coaching staff's going to have to challenge themselves in this offseason, is looking at the way they're doing things week to week to figure out how they can vary their own process.
You and I are recording this just to lift the veil a little bit right after the game. So Derek Carr just went to the podium and our beat writers are tweeting. And Derek just, I guess, in his opening remarks goes, yeah, we're talented, but talented doesn't mean wins. And that is 100%, if we want to talk about who the Raiders in 2022 are, it kind of feels like that. They're an incredibly talented group. On paper, right? Like if you put this team in Madden, you feel really good about lining up and going out and doing your thing. But there's just been some sort of disconnect. And I think that is going to be the $1 million question over the next 2 weeks, but really this offseason too, is what is the source of that disconnect? Is it just year one in a new system? Is it personnel? Is it just kind of figuring out the newness of the Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler era? And candidly, it's probably a mixture of all of it, right? Like we talked about, there's no easy answer for why things have kind of fallen flat for the silver and black this year. But man, no matter how you shake it, Fitz, just a tough one to swallow tonight.
It's also supposed to look better these weeks because we finally have Waller and Renfrow together with Devontae, right? Like the first two, we didn't have that for the majority of the season. So a key over the last month of the season is to see everybody come together. And I think in that process, we expected to see an offense that was clicking on more cylinders. Like there should, just on paper, to your Madden point, on paper, this Raiders offense going up against that 49ers defense next week should be one of those marquee, oh my God, I can't wait to see this matchups, because it's iron sharpens iron. And instead, you look at it and say, man, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. We saw a really nice catch from Darren Waller tonight. We saw a really nice moment from Hunter Renfrow, but we haven't seen all of it gel together. It just, to Derek's point, you can be talented, but that doesn't equal wins. Then the question becomes, how do you take that talent and turn it into wins? And that's going to be Ziegler and McDaniels are going to have a lot of lifting to do this offseason, figure that portion of it out.
And I think the most wild part of all of this, Fitz, is you're 100% right. But we talk about, hey, this game next weekend or New Year's Day back at Allegiant against the Niners, which I think we all anticipate is going to be a crazy environment. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Raiders went back to the formula and Josh Jacobs does have 130 rushing yards and Devontae Adams does have 2 touchdowns. It's just we talk about that inconsistency, right? And one week it's great, the other next week it's not so great. So it's, like I said, I feel like I keep saying it a lot. It's maddening and confusing that you have a hard time finding that consistency. And to your point, yeah, like Josh and Dave are going to have to, when all this is said and done, I think it's important to clarify as we sit here at 6-9, not officially eliminated from playoff contention. There is still a shred of hope, but that could all change by the end of the games tomorrow afternoon. But as we sit here, right, not officially eliminated, but Dave and Josh are going to have to really figure out what that missing oomph is to kind of get this team to not only play these one-possession games, because it feels like that's all the Raiders do is play one-possession games that go down to the literally final play. Like they are very Vikings-esque in that way. But how do you get from where the Raiders are right now and they're not winning these games to where the Vikings are, and we saw it earlier today, where they somehow, some way, don't know how they do it, but they come up and figure out how to find a way to get that W. And that's what the Raiders are lacking in 22.
Isn't that what the Raiders did?
That's what they were a year ago, 100%.
But the wild part about it is our stats and info group sent me the note today that with the Cowboys coming back and getting that win, there is no record for most blown double-digit leads in any one season in NFL history this year. So across the board, we've seen more big leads blown than ever before, double-digit leads. And that speaks to the fact that you've got to be able to continue to put pressure on the other team, and you've got to be able to cover. Your defensive backfield needs to be better than ever, because once teams, it used to be 3rd and 13 was like, well, this is never going to be converted. Now there's a bunch of teams out there that 3rd and 13 means drop back and absolutely sling it. So if you've either got to be able to just get after the quarterback at an alarming rate, which is what we expected from this defense, frankly, when we started, or you have to be able to cover almost everybody to win these types of football games. So it's going to be interesting, because on a day where the defense did its part, minus 3 or 4 plays, like I'm never going to fault the defense for losing out on 3 or 4 plays when the offense had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to put this game away. The offense was supposed to be the save. Like, we came into this year saying, if we just get okay defensive play, this could be a Super Bowl caliber football team. Well, today we got better than okay defensive play, and the offense just let them down.
And speaking of the guys on defense that are going to get lost in all of this, because that's what happens after you lose, just 2 guys real quick. I mean, Cleve Farrell, his best game in a long time, and I'm not saying that to be facetious or to put Cleve down at all, but best game that we have seen number 99 play in quite some time in silver and black. And then another guy, Tyler Hall, I thought had a really nice evening. Once again, doesn't really matter all that much since the Raiders ultimately took that L, but you look at some of these guys now individually, and let's be honest, over these last 2 games, I'm sure Dave and Josh are looking at guys that finish hard, right? That keep putting it out there, that keep doing what they're asked to do, that go above and beyond, that are exceeding their role. And I think tonight, Cleve Farrell did that. Stepped up, Chandler Jones goes down. We see him unfortunately get carted off. Next play, Cleve comes in, inside pressure on Kenny Pickett, helps force that interception. So, I mean, just because we are now, kind of clinging to the hope of playing postseason football doesn't mean that these guys are not going to pin their ears back and go to work, Fitz.
Well, especially for Cleve, who's got so much to play for.
100%.
Like, he's going to be on a football team next year, whether it's in Vegas or whether it's somewhere else. He's playing for his future, right? And when you see a guy come in like that, then it makes you really feel like, wow, because one thing we have to understand is when you run complicated systems, the hope for those coaches that run complicated systems, whether it's offensive or defensive, is that you can keep somebody in the system long enough for them to become an expert in it, right? So the hope, you'd almost rather overpay a little to keep somebody that knows your system that you don't have to reteach complexity to. So when you see somebody like Cleve that's getting some reps, and we'll see what it means for the next few weeks, but if he comes in and makes a huge impact, then it certainly makes a statement that, hey, this guy still has value to the organization. Sure, it may not be obviously like Max Crosby contract value, but in the world of just getting out there and continuing his career, he showed the Raiders a lot today. I think that's part of the great thing is that there's a whole group of building block guys here that have the opportunity to show that they should still be around next year.
Yeah, and we were talking. I was watching the game with Eric Allen today and Peyton and our production guys. Right. And you want to hear a great EA flex, by the way? I feel like I have to tell the story at some point.
Yeah, 100%.
So we were just sitting around and we were talking about, Steeler players of old, and we were kind of just going down the rabbit hole. And I said, man, when I was a little kid, Cordell Stewart was one of my favorite players, man. I loved the way he played. And EA, in just the classic EA way, where he wasn't like doing this to like make a big deal or anything. He goes, oh yeah, I picked him. He goes, actually, I pick sixed him actually. And then we were going. I was like, well, that's just like the coolest thing that I've ever heard. And he was talking. We were like, oh, who else did you get? And he's like, I got Favre a couple times, and I got Steve Young. That was a good one. And I'm just like, what a gem. What a gem. Shout out to Eric Allen. Shout out to EA.
I every time I have had the opportunity to meet him and hang around him when I'm around you guys, all I think about is the number of times that, like, when he was on Madden, you just didn't even throw to his side of the field. Like, my guy, unthrowable. Like, you just take that whole Eric Allen Island was the thing on Madden for a long time.
Yeah, he's a machine. But anyways, back to my original point is we were talking about some of these young guys, and Luke Masterson is the guy that I brought up, where I think if you're kind of looking at nice little positive bubble stories from this year, the fact that Luke Masterson has played himself into a nice little role in this defense is something that we should all commend him for, and really give credit to Dave and his staff too for finding him. I mean, yes, I know that the Perryman situation is the Perryman situation. He leaves early with the the shoulder. But Luke Masterson led the team in tackles again today. Let me just confirm that real quick. Yep, leads the team in tackles and has just been out there balling out and doing his thing. So if we're over these final 2 weeks, Fitz, if we're looking at individual pieces, guys that you want to see a little bit more from, I want to see a little more Luke Masterson. I want to see a little Tyler Hall. I want to see this version of Cleveland Ferrell. I would love to see this version for the next 2 weeks. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, who's part of this thing long-term in 2023 and beyond? And I think those are a few young guys to keep an eye on as we come down the stretch here.
Yeah, well, Masterson, by the way, I noticed today he had one play where he'd gone a little bit too far to one side. He couldn't recover fast enough. And afterwards, you just saw him like clap his hands in frustration. But there was it made me realize watching that live on the broadcast, man, my guy doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. For somebody that came from out of nowhere, like he's just solidly where he needs. He's around the football all the time, and he's rarely out of position. So kudos to him. And you're right. You mentioned him earlier too, though. There's a lot to be learned from every rep for Parham still. Mm-hmm. Like when you talk about somebody that came into camp, possibly a center, possibly a guard, playing multiple positions, they've really settled in. There's this moment here where you can look at the line and say between Colton, Dylan, and Andre James, like you've got a real opportunity for the left side of this line to get together and gel together for the next 5 years. So there's growth to happen, especially taking on a defense as good as San Francisco next week. There's a real opportunity for growth.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, that you're not going to have a better test for a young offensive line than going against that Niners front, man. I mean, they got a lot to play for there. I mean, I would assume statistically the number 1 or number 2 defense in the NFL. We're going to have to wait for the release to come out this week, but a no-joke big dog defense, and Dylan Parham, Colton Miller, all those guys that you mentioned, they are going to have their hands full. But I think looking ahead ever so slightly, Fitz, I think next week, throw the records out, right? I mean, who knows where the Raiders are going to be in terms of the big picture by the time that we kick off on New Year's Day. But I think for me, I'm really excited because it feels like it has kind of like that college rivalry week feel to it, right? I know it's no longer the Battle of the Bay, but to a lot of people, it still is the Battle of the Bay. So it'll be really exciting to see that kind of moment, that electricity in Allegiant Stadium. And this is the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, Al, that the Niners have come out to Vegas. So it'll be a blast to see. And for a Raiders offense, man, going to be a really good test, like you said.
Yeah, well, and the Raiders defense is going to get tested all over the place. I don't care about Brock Purdy being the quarterback. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant's been covered ad nauseam this point on ESPN. I watched a lot of him covering college football. He's an okay quarterback, but this offense is all about Christian McCaffrey, who is playing the way everybody thought Christian McCaffrey would when he had a real team around him. So It is a delight to watch them on both sides of the football. I'm not sure right now if I had to bet my house on the Eagles or the 49ers, I think I would actually bet on the 49ers because that defense is playing so incredibly well. So between them and then the Kansas City Chiefs to end up the year, like that's always such a statement game anyway, but there will be a lot on the line for the Chiefs there because the number one seed in the AFC should still be up for grabs at that point. So it's interesting to see how this team goes out and fights. Like you said, not technically eliminated. For anyone that doesn't know, at this point, either Miami or the Chargers would have to lose all of their remaining games, and the Raiders would have to win out. That's the only way that the Raiders get into the playoffs. So it was Miami would have to lose 2 of 3, but now it's a full-on lose out for either of those teams. The Chargers schedule incredibly easy. I don't think that's going to happen, but Miami does have some difficulty in there. So maybe that's the little straw. But then this is the philosophical question I say to you all the time, Eddie. Like the question shouldn't always be, can we make the playoffs? The question is, are we good? Mm-hmm. And right now, I think it's fair to look at this season and say it has been a disappointment, that it hasn't been as good a football team as I expected. And then you got to start looking at it and saying, who are the building blocks, who are the foundational pieces, and how does it get better next year? Because things have gone wildly wrong this year, and we're still talking about the playoffs 2 weeks away. So it's not that far off from being a good football team, but they have to figure out how to make it better.
Yeah, and then, like I said, that's the big decisions that Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler are going to have to make, and I don't envy those decisions because, man, it is. If we've learned one thing this year, Fitz, and I feel like we learn it every single year, it is tough to win in the NFL. It is tough to put together the right 53 guys to make that happen. It is an incredibly challenging uphill battle to succeed at doing that, and that's why only one team wins the Super Bowl every year. But Fitz, it was so nice to see you on the holiday. You want me to?
Are you not going to turn those?
I'll light it up. No, I'll light it up.
Okay.
I'll light it up as promised. So I have this sweater here. Everyone who's watching this on the YouTube can see. But here we go. I'll even move the camera for you, Al, or the mic.
Look at that. Mm-hmm. I feel like I want to do like, here comes Eddie Claus. Here comes Eddie Claus. Right down Eddie Claus Lane. I just made you Santa. That was the thing I did there. Yeah, yep. You're welcome, America.
Well, while unfortunately not a ton to celebrate right now, much to celebrate in general, though. Health and happiness, Fitz, and it has been a great year because we have gotten to hang out as much as we have, and I think we're going to see you once more before the season ends, TBD, yes. Whether that's in our virtual setting or in person here in beautiful Las Vegas.
All right. I'm walking into Allegiant like I own the damn place. Let's go.
All right, Kansas City. Jason Fitz is going to be there. Well, he's going to be in Vegas when we play Kansas City, but you guys get what I meant. Regardless, though, Fitz, it was so good to see you. Happy holidays to you and yours. So, Freddie Paskal, my man Jason Fitz, Al on the ones and twos, and everyone, I just want to give a real quick shout out to everyone in the control room right now who's just grinding on a holiday. I know they got a ton to do to help us make our little programs here, but big shout out to all those very talented folks back there, and we will see you guys next week. Fun fact, we will be in the Twitch Lounge next week, right, Al? Al's giving me the thumbs up. So we will be in the Twitch Lounge following the Niners game for our next episode of the Fifth Quarter presented by Twitch.